Hi, welcome to the International Space Station Flight Control Room. I have an exciting person here to visit us today. Guest NASA astronaut Katie Coleman. Katie, thank you so much for coming today.
I'm happy to be here.
So we're having all kinds of great stuff happening aboard the International Space Station. I'm so glad that you came here. First, Katie she was the Expedition 2627 flight engineer aboard the International Space Station. She is a veteran of 3 space flights, so 2 of which were aboard the Space Shuttle, STS-73 and STS-93. But most recently, she was living aboard the International Space Station, where she stayed for 159 days. That's a long time. So we are so very, very glad to have you here. And we just want to get into talking about all this stuff. Actually, another little tidbit. Katie actually, in a year, or it will have been a year, in exactly 1 week from today, when she actually returned to Earth. I cannot believe it's been a year since you've been back.
So fast. It goes so fast once you get back. It's amazing to me as well, and it's really just neat to see docking and to remember back to, just a year and a half ago arriving at the station.
Wow. And it's so exciting to see, just to be able to see the crew members who are aboard the station and being able to see those visitors come on board. And now I know you actually docked and joined a crew that was there, but at the time that you were there, you also received visitors on 2 shuttle visits that came up there. So tell me first, what is that like to dock and join the crew, but also to receive visitors? What is that like as a crew member aboard the space station?
Well, I tell people that we go up in groups of 3, but we make a crew of 6. And it's interesting. You'd think we'd spend a lot of time together, the 6 of us, but really the 3 of us that go up in the Soyuz spend a lot of time together. And we do, the emergency practicing and all that kind of stuff with the other folks that we're going to join on board. But in some cases, especially with the Russian crew members, we don't know them really quite as well. And so the minute you get on board, you're kind of saying hello to some people you don't really know incredibly well. But what is amazing is that you're all there for the same purpose. And these guys that we joined, we joined Sasha Kaleri, Oleg Skripochka, and Scott Kelly, and they were just so happy to have us on board. I think because they loved being on board, and they loved the work that they were doing, and they just couldn't wait to drag 3 more people into it and have us all just producing a lot of good science for the station.
Help and work together and see some new faces, I'm sure, as well, is probably nice to have on board this space station after so long. And I guess, while you didn't know each other as well and throughout the training process and beforehand, but once you get there, I'm sure you get to know each other a little better, living there aboard the space station together.
It's really true, and I think being on the station at all is such an amazing experience. And in fact, after, 159 days, I really would have stayed another 6 months in a minute. I mean, I did want to come home eventually, but it never gets old there. It's never boring. You're always busy, and it's an amazing place. And I'm always driven to share that, and I think all of us are. And when a new crew comes aboard, it's this great opportunity to say, look at this, and look at this, and can you believe we get to do this? I mean, it's just, it's really pretty neat. I remember the night that we actually docked. I mean, we have a lot of simulators here at NASA, and they all simulate the space station in certain ways, but not exactly visually. And I was focusing as we docked on the camera, on the screens that give all the data about how the docking is going. And in the simulator, I never think to look out the window, because what am I going to see? Some fake space station out there. So when I looked over and saw the actual space station, and it's just so clear and crisp because there's no atmosphere in between your window and the space station, I was so excited, and we just could barely wait through all the leak checks to get the hatches open and then come inside.
Well, that makes me think of something too. So you're talking about the end of that 2-day journey, but there is a 2-day journey from the time that you launched, just as there was for Padaka, Revan, and Akaba. They launched Monday night, Monday night, and then docked to the station late last night. So tell me a little about that journey. What is that like? Because it's literally 2 days. What are you doing? You're in very close quarters aboard the Soyuz, and you're just orbiting until you get to the space station. So I can imagine getting there is pretty exciting for you guys, but what are you doing during that 2-day journey?
Well, there's always more room than you would think. As soon as you hit 0 gravity, which is 8.5 minutes after launch, then everything, including you, is floating around if you're not strapped in, which we do start off that way. And we have a little compartment that has, basically a lot of cargo strapped to it, but it's, it's about as sort of big as this little area right around, sort of in a VW bug-sized area right around us. So there is some room there. So we don't really feel crowded, and it's more, we waited so long to go to space,
Hmm.
and then there we are in this tiny little capsule, just the three of us, Dimitri, Palinespoli, and I. And it's really an incredible view. I mean, it's spinning a little bit, so it's sort of rotating, and you're looking at the Earth, and the Earth is coming into view and going out, and coming into view and going out. And I found it to be actually amazingly intimate, really. I mean, in a space shuttle, it's just such a big vehicle. There's a
Hmm.
lot between you and space, whereas in the Soyuz, when it's just the three of you, I really found this very special experience just to be able to kind of, as a human, look out and realize that I was in a very special place.
Yeah.
And I had some time to relax before it was time to get to work on the station.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting because I would just think I would go out of my mind being that close. But it's nice to know that at least you have that a little bit of space, so it's not quite as cramped. It's not what we see, at on the launch video when we see on the inside everyone in the right seat, the center seat, and the left seat. You're not like that the entire time. So it's good to know that you have a little bit of mobility.
We definitely do. And we have actually all the amenities as well. We have a bathroom, works fine. And there's enough room that two people could go downstairs into the Soyuz where, well, if you need some privacy. We have food. We've got a window. And we've got just, I don't know, we had some cameras to be able to take some pictures. And even just a little bit of sort of studying what is our cargo, where is it, how are we going to unpack it.
Hmm.
And a little sleeping, too. I think that time before launch is pretty long and
Yeah.
just tiring. And so we caught up on our sleep. Everybody on our crew felt actually just great. So we just had a nice time in those 2 days.
Sure. I can imagine with the adrenaline rush of launch and that sort of thing, after a while, you just kind of settle down and get ready for sleep. So I can see that. Now, once you do dock, and you were talking about, we just can't wait to get the hatches opening. Can you just explain once you dock? So, for example, last night, the Soyuz O4M docked to the space station at 11:36 p.m. Central Time last night, but the hatches won't open until 3:10 in the morning. Can you explain what takes that time to before you? I mean, it's not like, honey, I'm home, and open up the doors. So explain why. I understand there's some leak and pressure checks. So what is going on before the hatches are open?
Well, the way our spacecraft connects to the station, it's kind of like having a front hall of a house. And so let's say Scott and Sasha and Oleg are inside the house, not in the front hall. They're inside the house, and then we basically come to the front door of the house and attach there. But before we want to open our hatch, we want to make sure we have a really good seal. So we're actually going to check our seal between the Soyuz and the front door of the house. And then we're going to check this. We're actually going to check the pressure inside the front hall. So everything has to be checked to make sure that when we do open that hatch, that we have a really good seal between us and the inside of the station. I mean, we don't want the station to lose any air, and we can actually, back away and then come back in if we needed to, if for some reason we didn't have a good seal. But the way that Soyuz is designed, if you dock, I mean, there's sort of a probe that sort of draws you in, and then there's
Hmm.
hooks that pull you in. You're going to have a good seal, but we just make sure we check the pressure. We have pressure sensors out there, in the front hall, pressure sensors inside our Soyuz, and we actually, just see that the pressure holds before we open the doors. And that you want to be really sure, so it just takes a couple hours to do.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for explaining that because I don't think a lot of people understood why can't you just get there and open the door and be there? And I can imagine just the anticipation, but certainly we can understand the reasons behind that. There are some safety issues and that sort of thing. So, speaking of safety, one of the first orders of business after you get aboard and you're excited and you see each other and there's a welcome ceremony, you're also able to conference with family on the ground who had been actually traveled to Russia to see you guys off. What is that like?
You know, it's so marvelous to see your family and to be able to actually, know that they can see you. And my husband and my son who's 11 and my son who's 28 had all traveled to the launch. And it was just neat to be able to wave to them and say hello and and feel a little bit close. I mean, here I finally got there, and it's hard to believe that a human being really does get to leave the planet and then go live on a space station, and getting to just say hi to your family. And it just was neat. Some of my favorite pictures are actually pictures that they sent me of my family in mission control talking to me. And for example, Dima's son said, Papa, will you bring a toy home for me? So to them, it's just nice to connect as well. And I got to say hello to some friends, and it's kind of that time of being a little connected to the earth before you're really just isolated up in space.
Sure, and I know that you are able to stay connected throughout your mission as well. But it is, I can imagine, nice, especially after your family. Again, when you mentioned they were talking to you in mission control, it's mission control in Moscow, so um, at that center, and so they stay a few days afterward and wait for your journey to for you to arrive at the space station. So it's an amazing adventure, I'm sure, for both sides, you as well as the family as well. Now, also, one of the first order of business after the family conference, the welcome ceremony, is first and foremost the safety briefing. Can you walk through what exactly does that entail?
This is similar to getting on an airplane, and the flight attendants always explain, where are the exits and how are you going to know how to find the exits and where your flotation device is. Well, we actually learn all that stuff before we leave home, and so we know that. But it's somehow different to see it in the real space station in a floating around kind of environment. And I say floating, but really it's about flying around. And for example, when we do simulations, which we do really a lot of emergency simulations, there are in the ceiling, so to speak, of the Japanese module, that's where one of the fire extinguishers is. Well, in a practical sense, here on the ground, I'm not tall enough to reach up and get that, and that fire extinguisher is going to be heavy. So in a simulation, it's just going to be, on the floor or next to where the real place is. And when I say I'm going to go get that fire extinguisher, what I do is I go up and I tap that panel and then I get it from the real place. But it's still not the same as really seeing where everything is. And it's literally a tour of the fire extinguishers, of the extra oxygen masks, of where the computers really are. Even though we actually know it intellectually, it's important to really experience that. And that's why, we don't just say we're going to have a fire drill in an elementary school. We actually have fire drills so the kids can really practice. You can really do it. And we do those kinds of exercises on board as well while we're up there to make those kinds of things real to us in case we need to do them.
Sure. Now, also, so today, the Padaka, Revan, and Akaba are going through some familiarization tasks. So can you explain exactly, the adjusting to gravity, what exactly are they doing to familiarize themselves?
Well, my first, recollection is actually Scott Kelly was our, guy who was already on board, and then together we became the three USOS, United States Operating System or segment crew members. And Scott was just so excited to show us everything. He'd go, okay, so when you're going to do water sampling, okay, it's going to have, 3 pages of directions. But really the important things to notice are, is this thing plugged in? And make sure you see this before you turn it on. And, but of course, we're going to start with the real players. We're going to start with the bathroom. And so we had a bathroom tour. It all works pretty well. But again, we've trained here on the ground, and this bathroom is an engineering system, right? But it just helps to have somebody show you in real life, this is how it works. This is the noises it makes sometimes. Don't worry about that noise. Do worry about this noise. We're up there together, and these systems are really important. So, we're pretty candid about these things. And, Scott would say, listen, if you ever see, this or this, I don't care if I'm asleep. You wake me up, and we'll solve that problem together. We'll talk to the ground. But don't be shy about it. So, we're establishing those kinds of relationships in real life, and also just a tour.
Sure.
We're seeing the exercise equipment. We're seeing the cupola. We're making sure we understand how to open and shut the windows, how they really feel, what's all the way closed, what's all the way open. A lot of very practical kinds of
Well,
things.
and I can imagine even, the tour is kind of beneficial, especially for someone like you, because you weren't there. You had been there before, and it looked very, very different when you came back, when you returned. And so there were some new things aboard the space station. You want to talk about what was new when you got there?
Well, for me, it was actually all new in that my particular missions that I had been on, I had never been to the
Oh, that's
station.
right. You were
I had a
starting during night.
laboratory mission, which was literally a mock-up of doing experiments. It
Right.
was our proving ground for a lot of experiments and how to do experiments
Right.
up there. And then we launched the Chandra. So I had never been to the station before.
Right.
So it was all kind of new. So to me, just seeing it big and wonderful, and I tell kids it's like, 8 school buses all strung together in a line, or, one big long train of about 8 train cars. So it's actually pretty big. But, so I never felt closed in there. And it was also just nice to have my own little place there. I had my own cabin. And Scott was just really nice. it was kind of like going to visit somebody, and they haven't had company in a little while, and he's just all excited about having guests. And he made sure that our beds were ready and that all our stuff was lined up so we could find it. It was just really, really nice of him and pretty cute.
So, well, let's talk about this. You were talking about having your beds ready in your little area. So I know also today, Akaba was setting up his crew quarters. I'm going to talk about the crew quarters because you do have a private space. Describe for us, if you will, just a little bit about the size of that space, what is in that space, what do you do in that space?
Different folks are different. I think it depends how big they are. I can do everything and anything in my quarters, and even actually turn upside down if I'm curled up into a little ball. And there's times I like to sleep that way. So we have a sleeping bag that's kind of hanging on the wall. It's actually kind of tacked down in a couple places, and sometimes it's nice not to have it tacked down. And I would, wake up and look and see sort of a view and realize, oh, that's the bottom of the computer. I must be upside down. So in there, it's really our space. We, in general, have our own computer in there, so we can do email. We have an internet protocol phone. I could call my family every day, which I did, I think, except for about 3 days. And with the door shut, it's very soundproof. And for me as a person, that was important, in that you can have a conversation with somebody on the ground, can do a little venting, which I think is pretty healthy, and just have a conversation that is private and personal, as private and personal as any cell phone call, even down here on the earth.
Sure. And I can imagine that personal private space is very important to have, while you're at it, just as it is for anyone here on Earth. We all need our space. So it's very nice to know that you guys have that area, aboard the space station. So you also, I understand, are able to set up a laptop computer and that sort of thing as well, in that crew quarters. So you can.
Right, and probably when Joe arrived today, probably his computer is actually already all set there, and it already knows that it's going to be Joe's computer. There'll be a whole series of ways to attach stuff to the walls of the crew quarters, because that's the secret to being up there, is that everything is going to float around. And so we will maybe make like sort of a little lattice work of bungee cords that you can tuck things under, which is a little dangerous because when you pull something out, the rest of the bungee cord moves and something else will float out. But then we also have little Velcro patches, on the sides of the walls, so we can attach I would have like a little bag that would have, maybe my toiletries in there, just little, or notebooks. My notebook could stick to the wall. Try to put everything in the same place all the time so that you can always find it. And so Joe is making that place, just good for his stuff, and deciding, well, what things does he want to keep out towards the bathroom compartment, and what things does he want to keep there in his cabin. I usually would keep, a few, like a change of clothes in my cabin, my gym clothes, things like that. But then, the majority of my clothes, which are not too many, would be out in another place in the station. And then when I needed a new shirt, I'd go find one. But I didn't want to keep a lot of stuff in my cabin, or else it's just a mess.
Sure. And so you mentioned not too many. So how often did you get to change your clothes? Or how long did you wear? Let's just say a shirt. How long would you wear a shirt?
It depends. I mean, I like to wear different stuff different days. So we had, I think, 12 shirts for 6 months. And so I would actually get a few of them out and wear a couple of them. And so basically I'd have sort of like, 3 shirts that were, you could think of them as either clean or dirty, and wear those until you basically spilled something on them, which isn't going to happen like this way. It's going to happen when something just from somebody, even yourself, just sort of squirts towards you, and suddenly your shirt's got spots on it, and it's just not as nice. So we usually have about 1 pair of pants a month. It sounds terrible, like it's not very much and that we would all be smelly, but we weren't. I mean, it just somehow don't get as dirty up there. Although we do a lot of exercise, and we have separate gym clothes, and we do change those, all the time. In fact, I was the exercise clothes police. I would go, boys, it's new gym clothes day.
It's time. That's great. Well, so let's just real quick. You asked, and I promised I would ask a question. So we're going to go, and we had polled Twitter for a few questions, and so I'm going to go ahead and ask one of those questions for them. The first question comes from Tyler Russell. What's your favorite space meal?
I like just kind of comfort food. I like things like beef stew and macaroni and cheese and, broccoli, stuff like that.
Now, I understand there is a favorite dessert. You want to talk about that one? I hear it from many of the astronauts, the cherry blueberry cobbler.
Ah, I did actually like those couplers quite a bit. Although a lot of our stuff has sort of a preservative kind of taste in it, so it will last forever and ever and not be bad. And after a little while, I have to say that I got a little tired of that taste.
I can imagine. So let's go with the second question. This one comes from Harper Gardner. What is the best or the worst part of your week aboard the ISS?
Well, the best is every single morning. You know, waking up. Our crew was kind of a late night crew, so we'd stay up late and then get up, right before the day started. So I would, set my alarm just a few minutes before our first daily conference, and I would have already read all the messages and things like that the night before, so I'd be ready. So I would just like wake up, fly down the lab, go brush my teeth and everything, and my commute was 5 minutes and really only 30 seconds. So I just loved waking up every morning just going, I am going to work and I am flying through the lab. So I really liked that part. The worst part is just that there's so much good work to do, and it takes a frustratingly long time to do that work, especially because everything is flying around and you can lose things. You have to be so careful not to lose things. And not losing things is stressful. I find it stressful down here on the Earth, and especially so up there. And just, there's so much good science work to do that if you could just do it faster, we'd be discovering more things. And so I just felt a pressure to be working a lot.
Sure. So we talked about work, and you guys do have that red line that goes across the timeline, and you're constantly scheduled for every little thing. But let's talk about playtime or your spare time. And now I know one of the things that you are famous for, you are famous for this, was your flute playing there in space. And you actually, and I'll go ahead and pick this up. You actually brought one of your flutes with you. So talk to us a little about, I understand, I think you would spend time in the cupola and just explain where that is and what you would do, during your spare time.
Well, this is my actual flute that went to space, at least most of it. The top part is actually, I took the top part, a mouthpiece that is sort of generic for any flute, and I took one that belonged to the flute company, and they have it in a flute mobile where basically beginning flute students around the country get to put that mouthpiece of that flute, which has been, I think, I don't know, 50, 60 million miles in their flute, and they get to play part of the flute that went to space. But the rest of it is mine. And I played in the cupola, which is right in the middle of the space station, for a couple reasons. First of all, the windows, the view, getting to look out at the same time that I'm playing music. And I generally don't really play alone down here on the Earth. I play with people. So I brought music of some of my favorite folks to play with down here, which actually include other astronauts that Dan Burbank just landed. Chris Hadfield is about to be up on the station next December. Mickey Pettit is our singer, and her husband Don is up on the space station right now. And Steve Robinson was on the mission that actually installed the cupola. So when I'm up there playing and I'm listening to our band rehearse and playing along, they're up there with me. It was also a place that was good to play because it was in the middle of the station and everybody sleeps at either end of the station, so I knew I wouldn't wake anybody up.
That's great. It must be nice. So tell me real quick just a few things. I mean, aside from flute playing, what other things did you do? I actually saw a question on Twitter. I didn't bring that one here. I'll just throw it out there. But the question was, can you play tag on ISS? So I guess what they're asking, the question is really about your free time and how you interact with the others, as well. So explain some of that stuff. I mean, maybe, watching television or, dinner time or anything like that.
Different crews are going to be different, and I'm convinced that we will have new microgravity games, that are invented because we're up there. We would do things like it's not about floating around, it's about flying, and so we'd have little contests to see who could go the furthest through the station without running into anything. In other words, have really good aim to be able to launch yourself, and that was pretty fun. Sitting around, we would actually do that, even though we sort of float around together, but it would get to be Friday evening, and you're really tired and kind of done thinking, and you've really been working really hard all week. And in general, we would kind of sit around and watch a movie together. It was something that our crew liked to do together. And then on Saturdays, we'd each kind of do our own thing, work our exercise in when we wanted to. A lot of corresponding with friends and family and trying to find ways to share. And I'd say you can never, do that quite enough. But it's never ever boring up there.
No, and honestly, I followed your mission, and you know, you did a lot of things, of those extra things, in trying to share that story, because, and I think that even with the stuff that you did, and sent down to us and let us know, you know, this is what you guys are doing up there. And like you said, it never gets boring. There's just never an I mean, there's never too much that you can share with us, because there are so many things. And even from my point of view, being here, there's always something that I learn every day about what it's like on the space station, and you know what not working and living, and that sort of thing. And you know, I'm always surprised, because I'm thinking, wow, there's, you know, it doesn't get old, even from my standpoint. So I can't imagine being up there that it would get old for you. I'm going to go ahead and ask another Twitter question. So this third Twitter question comes from Dark Gengar. What one thing do you miss from Earth while living in space?
I missed family. You know, I got to talk to them every day, and every week we would have a video conference, and we would even just do things, my son and I, like read. You know, I would read. I had some books electronically, which was really really nice up there, and I would actually read to him. Not every day, but many days. And in some ways, it kind of gave us this sort of little emotional space to be together. Because, you know, I don't know, you can only talk to your mom every day for so many days. Like, hi, how was your day? Oh, my day was fine. You know, even though I'm doing cool things and he's doing cool things, it's just not what an 11-year-old wants to do. And so by just reading together, we just kind of give ourselves a way to sort of be together. So I would do some of that.
Yeah, that sounds great. So let's go ahead and ask the last uh, question from Twitter, and then we're going to be close to wrap up time here on the today's ISS Update Hour. This question comes from Tara. Was it difficult to adjust to micro G and back to 1G? Which was harder?
Well, it's funny you should ask, because I have this image now that Joe and Gennady and Sergey are up there, that at least for us when we were new, okay, you get up there and you're so excited to be floating around, but you're a little bit clumsy because, you know, every little movement sends you sailing. And I have this image in my mind of, you know, Scott was the guy who was already aboard, and Paolo and I would, you know, want to come over and ask him something. And so we would, you know, race over there, and it's kind of like having a new puppy, you know, that just like crashes through the entire house, and things are falling off the walls, and Scott is catching things and putting things back on the walls, and then we land at his feet and look up at him like, isn't this great? And he's thinking, yeah, great, except I'm picking up after you guys.
Here comes Katie.
You know, and well, you know, but it happens to everybody. There's a certain
Sure.
amount of time it takes to get used to flying around
Sure.
up there.
Yeah.
And so Joe and his crewmates, probably not Gennady. Gennady will just remember how to
Yeah,
just sail
this
through.
is his fourth time to be
Yes.
there in space.
And there is a
so-
certain memory, and that counts for coming home too. I'd say it's harder to get used to coming home because you're just used to really gentle movements up in space, and then even walking is a pretty provocative movement. A lot of us are sick. I'll tell you, I was sick when I got home, but there's medicine that can help with that. And I mean, right away, you know, within a couple hours, you know, I felt just fine. But sure, it takes a while to walk a straight line, and as for walking a straight line with your eyes closed, that takes quite a few days.
Wow. Well, great. Thank you so much for that. So we have time for one more question, and this is just my question. You were the robotics lead and science officer when you were aboard the space station, and I know you had many, many different vehicles. There were two space shuttles, the uh, three Russian Progress supply ships, the ATV-2, that's the automated transfer vehicle. Now it was automated, so you didn't have to worry about that docking. But then there was the Japanese Konatori, and you actually had to use the robotic arm to capture and pull that in. And the reason I want to ask about this is because there's some similarity with it and the upcoming SpaceX Dragon. That SpaceX Dragon is scheduled to launch on Saturday and morning at 3:55 in the morning Central Time. And so, can you just tell me real quick what that experience was like using the robotic arm?
That was one of the highlights of the entire mission. And in fact, I've been, you know, coaching or sharing with the guys who are on board right now about what it was really like, because there's things that just can't simulate. And just having that big supply ship, I mean, it's the size of a school bus. And the Dragon is just a little bit smaller than that. But, you know, it comes up and you see it, it's just a little speck coming closer and closer and closer. And then it gets really big. And it's like having that big giant bus drive right next to you, and then using the controls of the robotic arm. Paolo and I together, you know, he's calling distances and I'm controlling the arm, and you reach out and grab that thing, and my heart was just pounding afterwards. It was just so exciting. But, it's something we practice, and we practice, what if this happens? What if this happens? And Don and Joe and Andre have practiced that as well. And they'll be great, but it's just kind of nice to share a little bit about what it's like with them. And even in terms of how we set up the cockpit, and, how you can see bright outside and it's dark inside, and where to put your procedures, and how big it's really going to look. It's going to be so much fun.
And where from in the station are you working when you're doing the robotic arm?
So we are in the best place of the station. We're in the cupola doing that. And Nicole Stott did the first one, HTV1. I did the second one. And we think, as long as Dragon is on time, that Don and Andre and Joe will do the third one. But if it's late, Sunny Williams will be up there.
That's right.
She'll do the grabbing. And there begins to be a trend. Nicole, Katie, Sunny. We might begin to suspect that only girls can grab supply ships with robotic arms.
There you go. You heard it here. Thanks so much. Again, that SpaceX Dragon launch is scheduled to take place on Saturday at 2:55 a.m. Central Time from the Kennedy Space Center. We'll have live coverage for you here on NASA television beginning at 2:30 a.m. Central Time. Katie, thank you so much for coming and out to talk with us. We'll be back here tomorrow for ISS Update during the regular time, 10 a.m. Central Time. Up next on NASA TV, a video file at 11 a.m. Central Time. This is Mission Control Houston.